There's a Grimm's fairy tale called Iron Hans about a wild man deep in the forest who lives at the bottom of a pond. He's something scary. I think the first thing he does in the story is when an adventurer goes to find out what exactly is it that's deep in these woods that's keeping people away. The hand comes out of the pond, pulls his dog down, and being a hero, he doesn't react. He just thinks. He goes back, tells the king what happened. The king sends some men out, and eventually, after some more dismay, maybe a couple soldiers get pulled in, maybe they all get pulled in, they go back and they send more. Eventually, since this is a fairy tale, they get their buckets and they just start bucketing out water, and that is how they find the wild man, Iron Hans, at the bottom of the pond, called Iron because he's red-haired and ruddy-skinned. And for years, Iron Hans lives in the center of the castle in a cage. And one day the prince, who is playing with his beloved golden ball, something he loves more than anything else, one day that ball gets away from him and rolls into the wild man's cage. The boy says, "Give me back my ball, Iron John." And Iron Hans says, "I'll give you back your ball if you let me out of this cage." "I can't let you out of this cage. I don't have the key." "I know you don't have the key, but you can get it for me." This boy really wants the golden ball. So he relents and says, "Okay, how do I get the key to let the wild man out of the cage?" And Iron Hans says, "The key is under your mother's pillow." So the little boy sneaks into his mother's bedroom. Sneaks into his parents' bedroom. Goes to his mother's pillow and steals the key. And upon putting this key in the lock, twisting it, and the cage opening, as Iron Hans steps out into freedom, the boy realizes what he has done. His parents will beat him. His parents will no longer love him. So Iron Hans gives him a choice. He says, "You can come with me, young man." And so he does. He gets on Iron Hans' giant shoulders, and they escape into the dark wilderness of the woods, where there's a pond. And the boy is left in charge of this pond to earn his keep, that nothing, not even a leaf, fall into the pond or else. The boy, of course, thinks this is absolutely stupid, but Iron Hans emphasizes that if anything were to fall into the pond, it would pollute it. So Iron Hans goes out into the recesses of the woods to do whatever it is he does, and leaves the boy in charge of the pond. And the boy quickly falls asleep, only to wake up and see that a leaf has fallen into the pond. And when the boy reaches into the pond to get the leaf out of there, his fingers dip into it just a little bit, and the tips of his fingers turn to gold. And immediately there's Iron Hans saying, "What have you done, boy? Why would you touch the pond when nothing is allowed to even touch it? I'll give you one more chance." Well, the next day, Iron Hans leaves to do whatever he does in the forest during the day, and this time the boy is determined not to fall asleep. And as he's looking into the pond, he sees his reflection. He looks different to himself. He's getting older. His face is changing. And as he's bent over looking at his reflection, a strand of his hair dips into the pool. So, of course, he pulls out his handkerchief, do-rags his head. But Iron Hans knows, and here he is to say, "Boy, what have you done? let me see that hair. And he takes off the do-rag, and his hair's all gold. So Iron Hans says, okay, it's time for you to go back to the world of men. You can earn your living there. But you are the kid who let me out of the cage. So if you should ever need me, come to the edge of the forest and call my name.
どうしても困ったことがあったら森へ来てわしの名を呼ぶがいい。力を貸してやろう。誰がお前の力なんか借りるもんか。その意気だ。
Now the boy's hungry and begging the people in town for work so he can eat. And eventually he does find himself working for a cook. And it doesn't take long for him to realize he's working for the cook of the king of this new kingdom he's in. And unfortunately, this is the first job he's ever had. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he breaks a dish. He gets yelled at. He tries to keep on trucking. He breaks something else. He's slow. Finally, the cook is just fed up. And he says, you know what? Go out and work in the garden. You can't mess up anything out there. You can't break anything, at least, you know. So now he's working out in the garden. And he appreciates that he's away from people. You know, gardening is still hard work, but a little more solitude. And then he hears the beautiful voice of the princess calling down from her window. She says, hey, garden boy, bring me one of those pretty flowers. So he does. He runs up to her room and gives her the flower, and they have a nice exchange, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm in love. And, you know, she kind of flirts with him and tells him he's a nice garden boy and sends him on his way. Well, the next thing that happens in the story is the rival kingdom comes to wage battle. And feeling content working in a garden, feeling in love, he's like, I don't want to see this kingdom get destroyed. Things were actually looking okay. I was kind of okay with working in the dirt for the rest of my life and interacting with that fine princess. So he runs to the edge of the woods and cries out, Iron Hans, Iron Hans. And Iron Hans appears before him. He says, what you need, buddy? He says, okay, I need you to give me a horse. I need you to give me a suit of armor. I need you to make me a warrior knight because the rival kingdom is coming to wage battle. Iron Hans complies. And as the king of this kingdom and his men are seeing their rivals come over the hill, and they're thinking, this is it. All we have left is our honor. Let's go out like warriors. This mysterious knight appears over the opposite hill, and he comes down and he's chopping off heads and he's freaking, you know, the bad guys out, and he's just totally fearless. And the invading army relents. And then the mysterious warrior just disappears. So the king, in kind of like this Cinderella fashion, is asking, like, you know, who is the warrior? You know, who do I owe tribute to? And, you know, some dudes try to act like it was them, but it becomes clear pretty quick that it wasn't them. So sure enough, finally in walks the mysterious knight, and he refuses to take off his helmet. But once he finds out that the king is like, look, show me who you are so you can marry my daughter because you are awesome and we need some of your royal blood, mix them with our royal blood so we can, get the next generation going. And he's like, oh yeah, that's cool. So he takes off his helmet and it's the garden boy. And of course the princess is just elated. And the story ends with the boy who was no longer a prince becomes a king. And I always like to assume that maybe he did get to reunite with his parents, and now his former kingdom and this new kingdom kind of merge into one big kingdom. And that's the story that Robert Bly used in 1990 to talk about masculinity in a mythopoetic way. And Robert Bly passed away, I want to say, about a year ago. He's an old dude. He'd been around for a minute. And I want to say, I can't remember the title of the book, but when his last book was announced, people were already going onto Amazon and giving it 1-star reviews. They hadn't even read the book. The same people who hate Jordan Peterson but have never actually read anything by him. So Robert Bly has been a target for a while. What's hilarious is when you actually Google him and look up what people say about him, the only examples they give of why he's not good is he'll tell stories just like I did and play. He's got this stringed instrument. I forget what it's called, but essentially like a plucking string like instrument. And people, make fun of him, that he's doing that. The same way that when the mythopoetic movement was happening and men were going out on a weekend, leaving their watches in the car and just getting in circles and drumming and kind of just, hollering, naked out in the woods and just kind of getting primal. People made fun of that. The national news telling emasculating stories about like what are these men doing, and so any of the criticism that he gets from feminists or men pretending to be feminists, it's all like really bullying kind of things. And before he wrote Iron John, he was involved in the 70s in this like bringing back the divine feminine kind of movement. So from the very beginning, and Robert Bly is a poet. He was by the 70s. He was already a well-known poet and teacher. So the beginning of his work was what he was trying to say. Yeah, man, let's get reacquainted with our feminine nature and all this stuff. And by 1990, he's still not being totally realistic, in my opinion. I have my criticisms myself. There's passages in Iron John where he kind of disses Christianity in a really inauthentic way, where you can tell he's just, kind of paying tribute to the feminists, the modernists, the materialists, saying like, oh, well, I'm not a bad guy, let me poke fun at Jews and Christians. But all that aside, because I wanted to let you know that people don't like Robert Bly, and again for the same reason they don't like Jordan Peterson. I could start talking about all the things I don't like about Jordan Peterson. His stuff is pretty basic. Jordan Peterson is pretty good about the basics. He's not good when it comes to. Well, I'm not even going to get into it, but Robert Bly and his book Iron John, he breaks down the whole myth as he's telling it, and he talks about the Industrial Revolution and how that ripped fathers away from their sons and daughters, and it's a book. When I gift it to people, if they actually read it, it kind of changes their life. And it's a book that my father passed down to me, and it's changed my life. If you're familiar with the archetypes, king, warrior, magician, lover, all of this falls right into the mythopoetic men's movement. So I'm curious, what do y'all think about Robert Bly? Has Iron John aged well, or is it time that we need a new, kind of a new mythopoetic work where, we're not afraid to, we're not trying to like pass this off like let me get the approval of others. When I mean others, it's like saying, you're writing a book. Like, well, for example, what was that book? Women Who Run with Wolves. What if in that book, at the end of every chapter, she's trying to appease men and be like, oh, I don't want to offend you. I know this book's about women, but I'm not trying to leave men out. Because that's kind of what happens with anything, that's for men, you go to a barbershop and you get mad that the dude won't cut your hair, and the dude's like, I only cut men's hair. This is like a men's barbershop, like one of the last places outside of the Masonic Lodge for men to gather and just be with men. And the Masonic Lodge is another one. How many women have I met that don't like Freemasonry? Not because they think it's some kind of anti-Christian cult, but because they can't be a member. And because they can't be a member, they're mad. Whereas, you got the old Groucho Marx joke, I would never want to belong to any club that would have someone like me as a member. So we all have our psychic baggage and our garbage that we carry around with us and we project onto people. And reading a myth like Iron John and I keep saying Iron John, Iron Hans. Robert Bly's book is called Iron John. The fairy tale is usually referred to as Iron Hans. But yeah, we carry around so much garbage, and the trauma that we experience as kids, the wrong things we're told when we're younger, and we have to reprogram ourselves. I think Iron John by Robert Bly is just a classic place to start on your men's journey. And I also think it's a great place to start for women ambassadors who don't want to fight, who want to understand, So I find it of great interest. I think the whole male-female dynamic is very interesting, and I think too often the people who want what the boys have at the same time are always trying to push the sexes against themselves. So what do you think? If you've never heard of Robert Bly, if you think it sounds interesting, let me know. If you think it sounds stupid, let me know. And if you've read Robert Bly, let me know. Because I definitely want to talk about what doesn't work with Robert Bly. And I know lots of people are going to say, oh, he wasn't feminist enough, or he's an old white dude. But I don't know why that matters, and I need something a little more real than that. So y'all help me out.
The main thing that I feel strongly is that we have a situation with men now, for the first time in 5,000 years or something, we have the men leaving the house to go to work. So they're not with the sons. Primary problem is this increasing remoteness between the father and the son. Industrial Revolution is only 140 years old. And there's a great man in Germany, Alexander Mitscherlich, who wrote the book called Society Without the Father. And he doesn't fool around. He's saying, it isn't that we have a weak father. It's not that we got a remote father. We don't have a father. The society doesn't. And I began to do this kind of work when, my daughters were older than my sons. And raising my daughters seemed to me a joy. But when the sons came along, it was perfectly clear that this is a problem. And I think most men feel that, because if they've had problems with their father, then they know that their father had problems with their father. Something is coming down the male line here, and you better know what it is if you're going to pass it on. Is that clear? That's where I was. And I realized I didn't know what I wanted to pass on. Am I going to pass on everything I got from my father? Are you kidding? If not, what? And what is eccentric and what isn't eccentric? So therefore, the good way to learn something is to start to teach it. What happens when the father leaves the house? Well, one thing that happens is I'm just trying to phrase this in the book. It works like this. In the ancient times, up until 200 years ago or so, when you worked with your father, mostly night and day, whether you were in a craft culture, a hunting culture, agricultural culture, your father fed you something on the cellular level. By being a foot or two from him, you received something from him. It wasn't a change in your mind. I don't think so. I think it was a feeding at a cellular level that you received. Another way you can put it is that you got, by being near your father, you got your body retuned to the masculine frequency. Now, the masculine frequency and the female frequency are very different. You were tuned to the female frequency in the womb, and for several years afterwards. And if you didn't tune well, you died. So, all of us here knew how to tune to that frequency, and we could hear our mother's voice with the most incredible accuracy, probably in the womb and afterwards, knowing what is going on there. That's a wonderful tuning. It's a wonderful tuning. But somewhere along in that thing, the bodies need to be retuned to the frequency that comes from an adult masculine body. And a lot of young men in this country are living with no adult male in the house. And I remember the police chief of Detroit said the young males that I arrest not only do not know a responsible male, they've never met one. So therefore, I mean, we are, to me, the whole drug thing and all of that is connected with not the stuff being grown in Peru. It's connected with the father hunger that's so incredibly deep. It's in the cells. And so I just want to look for a moment at that grief that's in there for a lot of the young men in this country who have no fathers at all.